The gas station at the edge of town, known locally as Station 13, had been around for decades. Nestled in the middle of a desolate stretch of highway, it was a solitary beacon in an otherwise unending expanse of darkness. People in town whispered about it, stories of strange occurrences, inexplicable disappearances, and things best left unspoken. But for Ethan, a college student desperate for extra cash, the night shift seemed like an easy paycheck. Ethan's first night started uneventfully. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a sickly yellow glow over the store. The shelves were stocked with the usual snacks, drinks, and motor oil. Outside, the pumps gleamed under the fluorescent canopy. It was eerily quiet, with only the hum of the cooler and the occasional rustling of wind outside to break the silence. Around midnight, as Ethan scrolled through his phone, the first oddity occurred. The old landline phone behind the counter rang. Startled, Ethan picked it up. "Station 13, he said hesitantly. There was silence on the other end. Then a faint, raspy whisper, "Don't let them in." "Hello? Who is this?" Ethan asked, but the line went dead. He stared at the receiver, his heart pounding. Shaking it off as a prank, he placed the phone back and returned to scrolling. But the unease lingered. At 12:45 a.m., the station's automated door slid open with a soft chime. Ethan glanced up, expecting a customer. No one was there. He stepped out from behind the counter and peered outside. The highway was empty, the surrounding darkness impenetrable. As he turned back, he froze. The security camera monitor behind the counter showed a figure standing at pump 3. The figure was tall and cloaked in shadow, their features obscured. Ethan hadn't heard a car pull up, and the figure didn't appear to have a vehicle. He grabbed the microphone for the intercom. "Hey! Can I help you?" The figure didn't move. Ethan squinted at the monitor. The longer he stared, the more distorted the image became. The figure's outline shimmered and warped, as though the camera itself couldn't fully capture its presence. Suddenly, the lights above pump 3 flickered and went out. When they came back on, the figure was gone. Ethan's stomach churned. He debated calling his manager but decided against it. The last thing he wanted was to sound like he couldn't handle a simple night shift. Instead, he grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside to investigate. The night air was cold and carried an unnatural stillness. Ethan shone his flashlight around the pumps, finding nothing unusual. As he turned to head back inside, he noticed something on the ground. A single, wet footprint, bare, human, and impossibly large, led away from pump 3 and into the darkness beyond the station's lights. Ethan hurried back inside, locking the doors behind him. He tried to focus on his phone, but the unease was overwhelming. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside made him jump. At 2:13 a.m., the power went out. The station was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. Ethan cursed under his breath and fumbled for his flashlight. As he turned it on, the beam illuminated the aisles, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, like someone tapping gently on the glass door. Ethan's flashlight beam wavered as he turned it toward the entrance. A figure stood just outside, their face obscured by the glare of the light. "We're closed," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. The figure didn't respond. They just stood there, unmoving. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just at the door anymore, it came from the windows, the walls, even the ceiling. It surrounded him. Ethan backed up, his breathing ragged. The flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, the figure outside seemed to multiply. There were dozens of them now, all identical, all standing perfectly still. The landline rang again. Ethan nearly dropped the flashlight as he grabbed the receiver. "Don't let them in," the voice whispered again. This time, it was clearer, more urgent. Who are you? What's happening? Ethan demanded. But the line went dead once more. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Ethan held his breath, his eyes darting around the room. He felt as though he was being watched. The flashlight flickered again, and in that brief strobe of light, he saw them. Figures standing in the aisles, their faces blank and featureless. They didn't move, but their presence was suffocating. Ethan backed toward the storeroom, slamming the door shut behind him. He barricaded it with boxes and shelving, his hands trembling. His phone had no signal, and the emergency radio was dead. He was completely alone. Or so he thought. A soft, wet sound came from the corner of the storeroom. Ethan turned his flashlight toward it. The beam illuminated a puddle of dark liquid spreading across the floor. From the puddle, something began to rise. It was humanoid but grotesque, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its head tilted toward him, though it had no eyes to see. Ethan screamed, throwing whatever he could find at the creature. It advanced slowly, methodically, as though savoring his terror. Desperate, Ethan flung open the storeroom's back door and ran into the night. The highway was empty, the darkness oppressive. Ethan sprinted down the road, not daring to look back. The gas station's lights grew smaller and smaller until they vanished entirely. When a truck finally pulled over to help him hours later, Ethan was incoherent, his words a jumble of fear and disbelief. The driver took him to the nearest hospital, where he was treated for shock. He tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed him. The police found nothing unusual at Station 13, though they noted that the security footage was inexplicably corrupted. Ethan never returned to the gas station. He left town shortly after, but the nightmares followed him. In the darkest hours of the night, he still hears the knocking, the raspy voice on the phone, and the wet footsteps behind him. Station 13 remains open, its fluorescent lights a beacon for weary travelers. But those who know its history avoid it, whispering warnings to anyone who will listen. Don't let them in.
The house was quiet, too quiet. Sarah had always enjoyed solitude, relishing her moments of peace when her parents went on their occasional weekend trips. At 17, she prided herself on being independent and capable. But tonight felt different. The winter wind howled outside, rattling the old windows of the family's colonial-era home, and the moon cast eerie shadows through the barren branches of the oak tree in the front yard. It was just another weekend alone, or so she thought. Sarah's parents had left earlier that afternoon, their car's tires crunching the gravel driveway as they waved goodbye. "Call us if you need anything, sweetie," her mom had said. Sarah had nodded, already thinking about the freedom of the next 2 days. She planned to binge-watch her favorite horror movies, snack on forbidden junk food, and perhaps invite her best friend, Emma, over for some late-night gossip. As the clock struck 9 p.m., Sarah curled up on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and pressed play on her favorite slasher film. The house creaked occasionally, a normal occurrence in a home as old as theirs. She dismissed it as the house settling, the kind of sound she had heard 1,000 times before. But then came the knock. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her pause the movie. She glanced toward the front door. Who could it be at this hour? The nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and her parents always called before sending someone over. Unease settled in her stomach. Ignoring the knock, she resumed the movie, turning up the volume to drown out her nerves. A few minutes later, the sound came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Her heart raced as she tiptoed to the window, peeking through the curtain. The porch light illuminated an empty doorway. She exhaled, laughing nervously at her paranoia. Probably just the wind, she whispered to herself. Returning to the couch, Sarah tried to immerse herself in the movie, but the unsettling feeling lingered. She picked up her phone and texted Emma. "Hey, are you awake? Something weird is going on here. Minutes passed with no reply. Sarah debated calling her parents but decided against it. She didn't want to worry them over what was likely nothing. Then came the footsteps. They were faint but unmistakable, echoing from the second floor. Sarah froze, her breath hitching. She was alone. She knew she was alone. Slowly, she reached for the baseball bat her dad kept by the coat rack. Heart pounding, she tiptoed to the base of the staircase, staring up into the dark abyss above. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. No response. Summoning every ounce of courage, Sarah climbed the stairs, each creak of the wood amplifying her fear. She checked her parents' room, her own room, and the guest room. All empty. The hallway was silent, save for the faint hum of the wind outside. Just as she began to relax, a crash echoed from the kitchen below. She bolted down the stairs, clutching the bat so tightly her knuckles turned white. The sight that greeted her sent a chill down her spine. The back door was wide open, swaying in the wind. Broken glass littered the floor, and the curtains flapped like ghostly hands in the breeze. Someone had been inside. Panicking, Sarah locked the door and frantically dialed 911. But when she pressed the phone to her ear, there was only static. "No, no, no," she muttered, trying again. The result was the same. She grabbed her charger, hoping the problem was her battery, but as she plugged it in, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. She fumbled for the flashlight in the kitchen drawer, her breaths shallow and quick. The beam of light cut through the darkness as she moved cautiously from room to room. The living room, dining room, and study were all empty, but the sense of being watched grew stronger.